Ice zombies fighting fiery dragons fighting ice zombies. That's what we've been waiting for. And we'd probably settle for ice dragons fighting fiery zombies. But we can't have any of that until Daenerys takes her dragons to Westeros. And Daenerys isn't going to do that until she achieves peace in the city of Meereen. Ugh, isn't that an impossible task? I mean, the city has so many problems. I mean, the story leads us to believe that there's this terrorist group called the Sons of the Harpy that have been killing Unsullied and freedmen in the middle of the night. Not to mention there's the slavers of the city of Yunkai that keep threatening to attack. Dany tries to keep the peace by marrying the Meereenese noble Hizdahr Zoloric, but he goes and poisons some honey locusts. Luckily, strong Belwas happens to eat the bowl of locusts, and Drogon arrives to rescue Dany. Barristan then steps up like a man, seizes power from Hizdahr, and leads Meereen into battle. Except that's not really what happens. In fact, the entire narrative of Meereen changes once one asks one simple question. Who poisoned the honeyed locusts? Now, the shave pate convinces Barristan that Hizdahr tried to poison Dany, but that makes very little sense. Why would Hizdahr choose such a public location to kill such a popular queen? They live together. Why not poison her in the privacy of their own home? Also, why choose such an exotic food like locusts? Why not poison something she likes, like figs or wine, two things that are in the box? And why choose such a weak poison? Strong Belwas ate the entire bowl and didn't die. That means if Dany were a third of the size of Strong Belwas, she'd still have to eat a third of that big bowl. And Hizdahr doesn't really have a motive for killing Dany. The fighting pits are open, and he's king. Maybe he wants to bring slavery back? Unlikely. Hizdahr surrounds himself almost exclusively with pit fighters for protection. They're the only people he trusts, and they're all freedmen. But Skahas says that Hizdahr is part of the Sons of the Harpy, and they certainly want Dany dead, right? Actually, we have no idea what the Sons of the Harpy want. In fact, most of the information we get on them is through Skahas. So let's take a look at their killings more in depth. The first death we hear about is an Unsullied who likes to visit brothels. After he's killed, a goat penis is shoved in his mouth, so it's safe to assume he offended someone sexually. Now, Barristan puzzles out that there were at least 6 attackers, and that they are likely injured, if not dying. And let's remember that the people of Slavers Bay believe blood pays for blood. Lo and behold, later we hear about 6 Unsullied killed in the streets. Now, we also hear about a cobbler and a moneylender getting killed. While we don't hear anything about their industries, we do hear about bricklaying. The bricklaying guild is angry that freedmen are stealing jobs, so it's likely that the cobbler and moneylender guilds also have the same issue. We also hear about a harpist getting killed who happens to be the voice of Yunkish freedmen in Dany's court. Now keep in mind, Yunkish freedmen are almost all prostitutes, so it's likely this harpist actually had connections to the prostitution industry. After all, if I were the voice of Las Vegas, I'd probably have connections to the gambling industry, so I'm guessing this woman was actually a madam. And earlier we heard about a woman who was very angry that her house was stolen and turned into a brothel. And finally we hear about some weavers getting killed. This one we know the culprit. It's Grazdan Zogolare, the Green Grace's cousin. He wanted some profits from his ex-slave's weaving industry and was denied by Dany. The point of all of this is that the murders at the beginning of A Dance with Dragons seem like independent personal vendettas. We have merchants and prostitutes who are angry about freedmen stealing jobs. And we have property disputes as well, but what we don't have is the killing of freedmen beggars or homeless, perhaps the easiest targets out there. It's important to note that none of these murders have anything to do with Hizdahr or the fighting pits. In fact, if it weren't for the Harpies written in blood on the ground, I'd be tempted to say that the Sons of the Harpy don't exist. But instead we seem to have an abstract movement that seems to act as one body, something without a leader or a head. I wish I had a metaphor. What would you call a bunch of leaderless individuals who cause destruction in a mysteriously organized group? Help me out, Strong Belwas. Locusts! Thanks, Strong, I owe you. Now you may be wondering, if Hizdahr has nothing to do with the Sons of the Harpy movement, how did he stop the killings? The answer is he didn't. Let's keep in mind that for 90 days all murders in Meereen stopped. So let's put the Sons of the Harpy aside. How did everyday murders also stop? Whatever happened in Meereen, it scared every single citizen into being law-abiding. There's only one person in the city with that kind of power, and that's the Green Grace. We know that Green Graces claim to receive visions, and that the people of Slavers Bay take them very seriously. For example, in Astapor, soldiers follow a dead body into battle based on a Green Grace vision. And in Meereen, the entire city stays home because the Green Grace says that a dude riding in on a horse is a bad sign. So it seems the Green Grace has convinced the entire city to be good based on some sort of vision or prophecy. This wouldn't be very much of a surprise, as both the Dothraki and the Volantians also think Dany is some sort of savior. The Green Grace clearly believes that Dany and Hizdahr will birth some sort of half-dragon, half-harpy hero for Slavers Bay. So it's the Green Grace and not Hisdar that brought peace to Meereen. So if Hisdar isn't involved, why did the Sons of the Harpy return after the coup? Well, if you remember, Quentyn also releases dragons on the city that are causing massive destruction. And we hear that people have stopped going to the Temple of the Graces. Whatever the Green Grace promised the people in return for being good, they're no longer buying it. It's also interesting that the new Sons of the Harpy act differently than the old Sons. They now attack at any time, kill shave-pates, use chalk harpies, and have political demands. So if Hisdar is innocent, who poisoned the honeyed locusts? It's important to note that Hisdar has a reputation for being honest and honorable among both the upper class and freedmen in Meereen. And during our story, Hisdar isn't just honest, he's hyper-honest. When asked if he has new arguments for the fighting pits, he admits, old arguments. When asked if he loves Dany, he says, not really. When asked why he wants to be king, he admits, selfish reasons. So when Hisdar says that spicy foods don't agree with him, it's believable. This is important as if Hisdar were the target from, say, Skahaz, Daario, or Quentyn, we face the same problems. Why choose locusts when Hisdar likes peppers that are in the box? Why choose such a public location? And why use such a weak poison? Hisdar would have to eat half the bowl, assuming he's half the size of Strong Belwas. So who poisoned the honeyed locusts? Well, it turns out Strong Belwas ate honeyed locusts intended for Strong Belwas. He's the only person in the box who loves locusts enough to eat a lethal amount. In fact, the weak poison assures that if someone else in the box tried a few locusts, say Hisdar or Dany, that they'd be fine. But who hates Strong Belwas? He's so lovable, right? Well, he does have enemies. Strong Belwas was poisoned by none other than the House of Paul. What? Who? Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Remember that champion that Strong Belwas kills in A Storm of Swords? You know, the one he takes a crap in front of after he kills him? That was Oznak Zopal from the House of Paul. With such a public humiliation for Oznak, it stands to reason that the House of Paul would want a public humiliation for Strong Belwas. And what better place for humiliation than the fighting pits that Strong Belwas gained his fame? Before making it to the fighting pits, Dany and Hisdar are mysteriously stopped in front of the Pyramid of Paul. It's at that point that the locusts were probably poisoned. When Drogon arrives, the House of Paul is ahead of everyone else escaping the fighting pit. Speaking of Drogon, there's some evidence that the House of Paul brought him to the fighting pits. What do I mean? Well, at the end of the story, Dany ends up stranded in the Dothraki Sea. At one point, she falls asleep and ends up with ants on top of her. She ponders how the ants found her. Now, I'm no scientist, but I'm pretty sure the answer is a scent trail. Now, Tyrion notes that Drogon has developed a taste for pork. Now, Meereen definitely produces pork, but weirdly no pig farmers have come in for restitution. Additionally, Drogon hasn't come near the city in months, so someone has been secretly feeding Drogon pork, and on the day of the pit fight, led a trail to the stadium. Now, the dragons have been spotted east of the city, where all of the old slaver families have estates, not to mention the kingdom of Lazar beyond them. All of them would be suspects for getting Drogon addicted to pork, but one more thing points to the House of Paul. When the Pale Mare rides into town, the man is yelling, "She is burning!" It's important to note that the Pale Mare is not from Astapor. Not only is he 8 days ahead of the other refugees, but he wears a tokar. Keep in mind, in Astapor, the masters and the slaves have reversed roles. The new masters would find the garment chafing, and the new slaves would find the garment impractical for work. So the Pale Mare either came from Yunkai, which isn't burning, or one of the estates outside of Meereen. But which estate? Well, the Pale Mare happens to be pink and white, which are the colors of House Paul. So when the rider yelled, "She is burning," it sounds like Drogon set something ablaze at the Paul estate. The man was then shot with a poisoned arrow to keep him from spilling the beans about the Paul's plan. What's interesting is that the rider of the Pale Mare seems to be dying of a poison very similar to what's used in the neck. Meanwhile, the bloody flux just seems to be dysentery. Now, it's interesting that the Green Grace and her Blue Grace is cover for the House of Paul, but this is to be expected. The House of Paul broke the peace. Since the Green Grace wants Hisdar and Dany to wed, it stands to reason that she would cover up a murder. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if the Green Grace covered up a whole bunch of murders over the 90 days of peace. So it turns out Meereen was actually a lot more stable than we thought. It took a lot of effort from the House of Paul to set things in motion for war. The Sons of the Harpy turned out to be more of a movement than an organization, and we find out from the Tyrion chapters that the Yunkai actually didn't want to attack Dany unless the Volantians did. Hisdar was just an innocuous dude who wanted to make some money by opening fighting pits, and Barristan turned out not to be a strong man, but a fool who believed Skahaz and wrongly mistrusted Hisdar. And that's all I have for Meereen, though I'm probably wrong about half of this. And if you need something else to think about, what really happened at the Tower of Joy?